Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of On the Record. I'm Emily McAllister, and I'm your local real estate agent here in Greenville, North Carolina. And today, I'm very excited. I've nerded out about this for several weeks, but we're going to talk to Tori Ruminek, who is with us this afternoon, and she is the executive director for North Carolina Ag Partnership. And we're going to get all into some really cool stuff about, not cool stuff, but cool information about the threat to farmland acreage in the state of North Carolina, which obviously is a very hot button topic for locals, and the continued development, not just for the eastern part of the state, but throughout everywhere in the state. And so I want to start, just tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of what the Ag Partnership is and how it is different from the Department of Agriculture.
That makes sense. So, Tori Ruminek, I'm actually from Tallahassee, Florida, so I'm not a North Carolinian. And people ask me, why did you move here? And I was like, have you seen your state? Have you seen the mountains? Have you seen the beach? And then my husband and I always talk about, and it's pertinent to this, how rural it gets very quickly once we leave Raleigh, and we love it. So it was a choice to come up here, and it's been a choice to stay, and we love it. So I work for the North Carolina Ag Partnership. We are a 501c4 organization, so we are a nonprofit that advocates for anything and everything having to do with North Carolina agriculture. We are not funded by the state. We're not tied to the state. We're big fans of what the state does for agriculture, but we have our own funding mechanism. And we do a lot of policy advocacy. We do a lot of supporting leaders who support agriculture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. In doing some of the research for this episode, I uncovered a lot of really neat information that I just found like super interesting. And one of the biggest things, obviously, is that the number one business for the state of North Carolina, even despite all of the growth and the development that we've experienced over the last several decades, is still agriculture. We produce more than 110 billion.
$110 billion.
Okay.
And I have notes because I want to get it right for everybody.
$110 billion annually in agricultural product. And one of the other things that I found super interesting was that almost 3/4 of that, 74% of it, is livestock, which is so funny to me because it's not that you would not think that that was the case, like just driving through eastern North Carolina, that is livestock. So help me understand like kind of what some of those numbers look like. And is there any specific unique challenge to the fact that so much of our production is affiliated with livestock?
Yeah, great questions. So yes, huge livestock producer. I wrote this down so I would get it right. So all my commodity groups are happy with me, but our top commodities in order for the whole state.
Okay.
Poultry, hogs, soybeans, eggs, tobacco, corn, sweet potatoes, cotton, and cattle.
Okay.
So we produce more than 80 different commodities, but those are the top ones for North Carolina.
Okay.
Pitt County, I would be remiss if I didn't say y'all have a lot of peanuts as well. My friend Ashley Collins would like to hear that.
Yes.
So it's interesting. I'm learning a lot more about the animal ag industry. My background's all in specialty crop. So coming up here, I've been welcomed into the whole community and learning more about how the animal ag industry works here. But there's a lot of nuance to it that is, a lot of it's just in time. You're keeping animals alive. And so you're bringing grain in. We're a grain deficit state, meaning that we have to bring grain in to feed all of the animals that we have. So it's not just, just raising animals, having them, go through the process. It's also all of the inputs that it takes to make those animals. It's a nationwide effort to make sure that we can have the industry that we have.
So that was something that I had in my notes was, you would think that livestock would require like less resources, essentially, less acreage to produce the livestock, but the feed demand is so incredibly high that, just like you said, even if we were to like plant grain on every inch of row crop land that we had, I don't know that it would be enough to to provide for the livestock that we have here. And so that obviously creates like its own unique set of circumstances. And then another thing would be because there obviously is this threat to farmland loss as we continue to develop the state, it is my understanding that specifically for hog and chicken farms, which are the two highest commodities that, like you mentioned, for livestock, is that the regulatory burden on these facilities is so incredibly high that if you lose one of them, it's very difficult, if not almost impossible, to replace it in another location. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so especially on hogs, there's been a moratorium, and I'm going to get the date right here, since 1997.
Okay.
So what that means is no new hog farms can be ever. Unless, you can get a permit, but it's almost impossible to get that permit. So I was actually looking at that before I came in to say, what would it actually take? And given the cost already of farming, and then to try and start a new operation with all of the permitting issues that you'd have to go through, it's almost impossible.
Right.
What I was thinking about too is that, so yes, you have like all of the issues with feed and all of that, but they've gotten so efficient that yes, you can't have a new farm, but you've got a lot more efficiencies on the farm. And so that makes a huge difference for those growers as well.
For row crop.
Well, for hog farmers, for poultry farmers, they're able to do more with less space.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the state of North Carolina is projected. I went through and like read line for line the booklet that I guess is provided to you guys at the Ag Partnership dinner. And so there was a lot of good information in there. And one of the data points was that the state of North Carolina is projected to absorb a little over 3.5 million people by the year 2050. And in that same time frame, lose 1 million acres worth of farmland. And so as far as you mentioned in the beginning, part of what you guys do is advocate for policy that protects farmers all around. So what kind of mitigation practices are in place to try to preserve the acreage that we have and slow that loss?
Yeah, great question. So I mentioned we're a big fan of the North Carolina Department of Ag. They've done an awesome job, and I'm not sure there's many places that have done as well with their farmland preservation programs as have happened here in North Carolina. We can go through those now, or we can go through them later, but I've got some.
We can do it now.
Yeah. So I brought these because I want to get them right.
Okay.
And when we think about the types of programs that are in place for people to try and conserve their land, I want to be very clear that this is not us against them. I'm never going to look at this as like I'm totally anti-development.
Right.
This is very much a how do we balance the growth of the state, which is a good thing.
Right.
Economically, it's a good thing. When we think about growing into these rural areas, it's like, do you get a Chick-fil-A? Do you get things that people want to have so that you can have talent live in those areas? But we also have to have enough land to grow on. So I just want to preface it with that.
Right.
And then also that all of the programs that are out there are voluntary. So there's no rule right now that says that a farm has to be enrolled in one of these programs. So we'll go through them and you'll see why that matters in just a second. The first one is conservation easements.
Okay.
So this basically just removes the development right from the farm.
Okay.
So you as the farmer keep your land rights. You are going to get paid on the value of that land that would be developed, but you can continue to farm it. You don't lose that land. You can pass it down to your family, and you can't sell it at any point. So the idea is we keep it in there. We take away that incentive for them to sell to a developer, and just take that whole element out of it and keep it in production.
Okay.
So that's one of them. And sometimes it's grants to local counties. Just depends on how it's set up. But a huge part of that is the county being in lockstep with the growers, and so that there's a plan instead of it just being kind of random.
Okay. As far as how that money is divided amongst the people that want to participate in those conservation easements.
It's not unlimited funds, and that's one thing at the partnership that I'm all for funding this farmland preservation program.
Right.
Because the more we have in there, the more we can preserve. So that's one piece. Another that's part of that same program is it's the present use value tax program. Okay. So, you have property taxes. On most land, it's going to be on the value of that land. So what you're going to pay in property taxes is whatever the development or property value would be.
Right.
This keeps farmers from really being taxed off of their land. So it's the present use of the agricultural use of the land that they're taxed on, not on the potential development use of the land. So even if that value of their land increases significantly, their taxes don't increase significantly just because things are happening around them.
Okay. And you may not know the answer to this question, but isn't there other like tax deferred programs that are affiliated with farmland acreage? I think I've run into this before, like where basically if you have land that is considered agricultural, the taxes are deferred, like continuously until you go to sell it. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, but I'm not a tax expert and I'm not going there. Okay. I just know that with this program, it just keeps them from being taxed out of the land at that point.
Okay.
So, and then voluntary agricultural districts is one that I wasn't super familiar with until I came to North Carolina. How familiar are you with like right to farm laws, nuisance lawsuits?
I don't know anything about any of that.
Okay, so
I obviously am familiar with like the nuisance lawsuits with the whole Smithfield thing because that was here.
Yep.
But I don't know anything about what you're referencing.
Yeah, so basically these are voluntary, again, another voluntary program to enroll your land in these agricultural districts, and you just agree to keep that land in agriculture. I think it's for 10 years. It may vary by county or by district, but there's a lot of protection in that from nuisance lawsuits, from you get public recognition because you put your farm in that, but the big value to that is saying we are farmland, we're keeping this land in farmland, and we're going to protect these farmers because you've got all these townhouses popping up or single family homes or whatever it is, and they've been farming there forever. We don't want to litigate them out of being able to produce their food.
So how is that different from the conservation easement? It sounds similar.
It's similar, but you're not being paid for that land.
Okay.
And it's not you're not losing development rights at that point. Conservation easement is very much you are working with the state to say, I promise I'm not going to develop this land. In fact, I'm going to give you those rights, but you're going to pay me to make sure that I don't sell this land off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Over the last 10 years, we've lost to a little over $285,000 acres of farmland, and more than half of it was concentrated into 29 counties. What are some of the most hardest hit counties, and why do you think that some of the counties in the state are at higher risk than others?
Yep. Obviously, Johnston County, outside of Wake, or anywhere that's kind of, this is not the right way to say this, but kind of bleeding out of Wake County. Anywhere near Charlotte, bleeding out of Charlotte, bleeding out of Greenville. Some of these just larger metro areas, people are starting to go, I think I'd like a little bit quieter pace of life. And so you have enough people do that, and then all of a sudden it looks like urban sprawl.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So as far as the runaway sprawl is concerned, and I have this later on down in my notes, but just for the sake of conversational flow, what kind of policies would the Ag Partnership either, endorse or want to see implemented to try to mitigate this concept of runaway sprawl? Because low density residential housing is the number one statistical threat to farmland across the state, and the only resolution to that really is to concentrate your development and to not allow this, or to make it more expensive, more difficult, less desirable to go into some of the neighboring counties and to develop. So what does that look like from a policy standpoint?
Yeah. So this is where I'll speak from the partnership, but I'm also kind of speaking from just like Tori Ruminek's view. Okay. It's hard to say I don't want more affordable housing. That is something that I think we need. I have friends who may never be able to buy their first home because they were just going, we want to live in Raleigh, but we can't afford to live here. So then they're looking in Johnston County, they're looking outside in Mecklenburg, and like trying to figure it out. But I also have an issue with setting a definite policy against any type of development because private property rights are a real thing. I believe that if you have the land, you should do with it what you will. One of the most interesting conversations that I had about land development was when I was down in Florida. There was a citrus grower, and our whole table was just kind of going off the rails about anti-development, how much it was just like changing the face of Florida, and it was horrible for the ag industry. And she chimed in, and she's a big citrus grower, and she chimed in and said, well, I would generally agree with what y'all are saying. However, I was going to lose my entire grove this year. But because I was able to sell X amount of acres off, I'm able to keep the rest of my farm. So it's really hard for me to want to say, no low density housing, we're only doing, development in this area and you can't develop anywhere else. That's hard for me, but I do think we talked about incentives earlier. I think that the incentives that these farmland preservation programs offer and just making it where growers can stay in business, that incentive is not there for them to sell, is the best option that we have at this point.
I think I'm glad you bring up that story because I find this to be such a conundrum. And I used that in my TikTok caption the other day, but I just love that word because it really is just like this never ending cycle of like, people obviously have to live. They have to be able to afford to live. Like living is expensive for everybody. And it's not just, if you want to live in a townhouse or if you want to live in single family, like just the cost of everything is so astronomical. And when you have people that have land that has been in their families for generations after generation, and, that I read another statistic that said, where is it at? There was a study that said the average age of principal owners of farmland throughout the entire United States is 69 years old, and that 52% of them have never farmed. Not a singular day in their life. Of more than half of these people that own all of the farmland in the United States have never farmed anything. And so you really are faced with a situation where in the next 10, 15 years, these principal owners are going to die off, and they're going to that land will change hands, whether it be in the form of liquidation through an estate or being passed on to whomever is next in line. But it's not profitable, to farm. And I said before we started filming, the most basic of economic principles is that people respond to incentive. And if it was more profitable to go into business to become a farmer, more people would do it. But because it's not profitable, especially all these like smaller operations are at risk of, being enticed by the development check. And so it is very difficult, I think, to try to find a balance. And I know you said you also had some information on some of the programs that are meant to try to kind of level the playing field as far as profitability for some of these smaller operations. What does that look like?
So I'm glad we're bringing this up because there's a lot of news if you're reading trade media in agriculture about this, but there's not a whole lot in the mainstream media about why it's not profitable or it's hard to make a profit or it's hard to keep your farm. So I want to talk about that for a second, and then we'll talk about some of what they're doing at the federal and the state level to try and help. But there's a few factors. So, if you're looking at a general consumer at the grocery store, they're seeing that their prices have increased just across the board. If you look at consumer price index, it's the basket of goods that you can buy for a certain amount of money, it's significantly lower. When we think about producers of food, it's the same story. Theirs is just the inputs to all of their agricultural products. So I think I heard recently the average increase on all inputs is up 40%. So imagine across the board, your grocery bill, your gas bill has gone up 40%. You're not making any more. It just gets really tight year after year after year to continue to do that. You start to cut down on things. You have to start to make trade-offs. And so that's where the farmers are. And there's a lot of geopolitical issues that go into this, and this doesn't have to become an ag economics podcast, but when we look at lower profitability coming from lower commodity prices, coming from the higher input cost, there's higher interest rates for just across the board for growers. Loss of export markets has been something that we've seen in a lot of different commodities, and labor shortages, and just the cost of labor for growers as well. So all of those things kind of just like bundled up together really just create this environment where if prices are stagnant or going down, it doesn't math,
right?
So when we think about what's being done to help growers, well, there's a lot of different what we call ad hoc programs. And so ad hoc being of the moment. At this time, we're going to set this program into motion, but it's not going to be one that we are going to have in perpetuity. So it's not like looking at crop insurance. That's not an ad hoc program. An ad hoc program would be like the bridge payments that just came out for growers. And they're exactly what they sound like. They're supposed to be a bridge between this season and next season. They help you when, the commodity prices are down, export markets are down. We're going to give you a bridge to make sure that you can make it to next season. It's never meant to make them whole, which is kind of a misconception because sometimes these programs come out and we rah them. And they were never meant to make a grower make exactly what they were going to make, in a perfect scenario. But we're seeing a lot of those come out from Congress right now. And my concern there is that if we become too reliant on these ad hoc programs that are not permanent, then we're becoming reliant on funding that's not actually there. And growers and farmers, I say growers because I worked with specialty crops for so long, but farmers would rather operate on a market. So everything we're talking about, today with farmland loss is on market principles. It's the same thing for farmers. We want to operate in a market that works, but we operate at scale. If you don't have that scale, then all of a sudden you have to start checking things off. And sometimes that's the land. Sometimes it's them saying the only way for me to have retirement or for my kids to go to school is for me to sell this part of my land.
To reduce to concentrate their resources into a smaller plot. Right.
Yep.
But so you mentioned obviously challenges, and I don't want to get it because there are so many tentacles to this, and we could spend like hours going over all of the things that influence it. But you mentioned obviously loss of the export market and labor force and all these things. But this problem of the lack of profitability, specifically in this industry, is something that has been ever present and over the last several decades. This is not a new thing. Like, this is not like, hey, since COVID, this has kind of been in the toilet. This has been a slow culmination of years and years worth of just like declining profitability in this industry. And so when we're talking about these short-term fixes, what is there anything on the horizon for a long-term fix that really could rectify the upside down market that we're dealing with?
It's probably very similar to the questions you get when the market feels upside down for housing.
Right.
Supply, demand. True. How do we get people, and this has been in all my years in working in agriculture, how do we get people to demand more American product, North Carolina product, Pitt County product, so that there is a place for these products to go, and that the demand is high enough that it brings the price up. The flip side of that is lower supply.
Right.
We're never going to say, you, Mr. Joe, cannot, grow X and Y crop anymore. That's just not going to happen. But what we can do is, how do we influence people to buy more and start going, I see that product was made in Mexico, or that product was made in Peru. I'm going to wait until the North Carolina product comes. And then that just tells the market that North Carolina product is the most important. Right. People are going to pay a premium for it. And that's where I see a big fix to this.
Okay.
Because otherwise we're dealing with I always talk about the supply chain for ag as just this giant web that is all connected and it's all disconnected. So it's, the input suppliers, you've got the farmer on the ground, you've got wholesalers, you've got other types of buyers, and they're all in it to make sure that their margins are as high as possible. And the farmer, we always talk about, is really a price taker and not a price setter. So we don't get the luxury of being able to say, no, I know you offered me, $15 a crate for that. I really would rather take 25 and I'm not going to sell it to you if not, and I can store it if you don't. That's just not how it works.
Right.
Yeah.
I think part of that, as far as people, what you're describing to me is somewhat of a culture shift that I think probably needs to take place in just all across the nation. I was having this conversation with someone else about, one of the things I have up here is I want to talk about obviously increased yield. And, does the yield increase compromise with if we're biochemically engineering our crop? To me, it would only be logical to question whether or not the integrity of the product is also being compromised. Because if you go into Lowe's and take a 2x4 off of the shelf, and then you pull a 2x4 out of a house built in 1940 and look at them side by side, you can look and see the difference. And so is there any concern? I mean, obviously increasing yield is good for us because it means that we require less land as a resource to produce the same amount of product. And I know that there are other things that go into that, like the fact that we're so precise in like the way that we plant, and we're maximizing as many plants as could possibly be planted in one, square acre of land. But when we get into that, is there any legitimacy to that concern? And how does like the MAHA, the Make America Great Healthy Again movement, play into that and make it worse or make it better?
I love this question. I was ready for this one. I'm going to get comfortable because well, first of all, it's a valid question. There's a lot of media about, bioengineered foods, about GMOs and all. I'm here to tell you they are extremely safe. I'm trying to think how I want to answer this question. So it's funny you mentioned the 2x4 because my husband and I were working on something and it was like a 6x6 or something like that. And he started measuring it and showing me it's not actually. Yeah. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why are they selling it as that if it's not actually the right size? And then how do we measure it from there? And then I said, this is why you do the house projects and I don't. Right. So, but I hear you and I hear the concern of, okay, if we're increasing yields, we're changing the way that, quote unquote food is made. Does it affect the integrity of the product? I would argue that we actually have safer and better food than we ever have. I always tell people in America, we have the safest, healthiest, most secure food supply in the entire world. And we just have a lot of really good technologies that have helped us make sure that we have that safe supply of food. But when you think about what we are offering in the grocery store right now compared to what was in like the 1950s, we have a lot more regulation on what can go into those foods, what can go onto those foods, and the food safety just all around how food is prepared. And so I really do believe, yes, we've used technologies to, increase our food supply, but it's not been at the detriment of health or of safety or anything like that. When we think about MAHA, that's a huge tenet of MAHA. It's, we're going to make America healthy again. We want you to eat
whole foods and
I am 110% for let's give everybody as many healthy food options as we can. I was really skeptical and we have a dispatch that I write for the NC-AG partnership, and I can send some of them to you if you want to read them. But they're very MAHA-centric because initially MAHA was coming out and saying, farmers are doing it wrong. You guys need to completely change the way that you're farming. And we're going, whoa. Where have you been? come to a farm and let us show you how we actually operate and how many regulations we're under. And not to mention how expensive it is to put fertilizer, to put crop protection onto our crops. So I think that's kind of worked its way out a little bit as we've actually been able to kind of put truth into some of that MAHA discussion. But the one thing I think about underneath the whole MAHA umbrella is, yes, eat more protein, eat more fruits and vegetables, but we also have to be very cognizant of food affordability and availability. It's very, one of my, well, now I'm getting on a tangent, but one thing that always gets me is, if you can buy organic food, if you can buy only fresh food and you have access to that, go for it. That's awesome for you. But there's families, there's mothers who cannot do that. Maybe frozen or canned is better for them. And maybe non-organic is better for them because it's within their budget. And so I do think there's nuance to that discussion as well, of making sure that, we do have foods that are available to all people.
I think we severely underestimate how large of an undertaking it is to feed 300 million people. That is a lot of people. And if you think about I almost think about it as amusement park food. And I'm not saying that, that that's what the agriculture is in the United States. But if you think about the operation that it takes to feed people in an amusement park and how everything has to go exactly how it's supposed to go in order to feed massive amounts of people in a reasonable amount of time and for reasonable affordability. I mean, it's the same thing, just on a larger scale. And I can appreciate why people take the position that, I want free range beef and I want eggs that came out of a chicken in my backyard and all that. I get all of that, but also we're so spoiled and we want all of those things and we want it on the shelf at Walmart. We don't want to have to get up on Saturday morning and go to the farmer's market and buy locally grown strawberries and locally grown peanuts and local beef and then also go to some other place on Sunday afternoon and buy sourdough starter. We don't want that. We want our expectation and what can actually reasonably be executed is so mismatched because we're so conditioned to just want convenience. And I'm sure there will be people that are it's capitalism because we have to be at work from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday and whatever, and there we could spend hours discussing all of the different ways why it has come to that. But I think it's so interesting because I get people's concern and I get the desire for this more locally sourced product, which basically is what you're telling me is if there were more people that were willing to put that at the top of their priority list in terms of, hey, I'm willing to go and to be the demand for this particular product, that could single-handedly be one of the turning factors for making it more profitable for smaller and larger operations.
Well, and if we're being honest, if you go to a grocery store, they're watching what you're buying. They are keeping an eye on, is this product moving? Is this product not moving? And there are real people that work in those produce departments that talk to people up the chain about what to buy. So one thing we always did, and again, I'm in North Carolina now, but I talk about Florida a lot because I was there for so long. But we would tell people, go up to them and ask them why they're not buying fresh from Florida. If you can drive by a strawberry field on the way here and the strawberries you're seeing are from Mexico, you got to go ask somebody why. And the same thing is true in North Carolina. We have a Gotta Be in C program that if you see that Gotta Be in C logo, you know that it is certified. It is from North Carolina, or it has been put together in North Carolina, and you're supporting a North Carolina business. So there are ways to do that. And I do think that some, grocery stores, they pay attention to it. When I go to Costco and it's certain times of the year, I will go and put the American grown strawberries on top of the Mexican grown strawberries because I just want people to buy those and I want those to be the ones that Costco sees are moving. So you don't have to be that extreme. Don't go rearrange warehouses. But it does make a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the other statistics that I read was, and I was searching for it and now I can't find it. Oh, here it is. 75% of our annual agricultural production comes from 3,500 operations. There are 65,000 farms in the state of North Carolina. 3,500 of them contribute 3/4 of our growth.
Yep.
And so basically what that tells me is that you have a tremendous amount of small operations throughout the entire state. And those operations, just for all the reasons we just discussed, as far as profitability, are more susceptible to losing land to development. So what does that do for them? I mean, like what kind of challenges are those smaller operations facing in order to be able to compete with people that are 5 and 10 and 15 times their size?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because so when we think about the consolidation, we're seeing it all throughout ag. So we're seeing it at the producer level. We're also seeing it at the input level. Grocery stores are buying each other too. So there's consolidation going on everywhere because of what you just said, because of the profitability problems. It's all driven by economics. And I do want to mention, so even with those statistics, 97% of farms in North Carolina are still family farms. So that's something I think people forget is even though we talk about a bunch of different sizes of farms, you're still supporting North Carolina families. So just want to put that out there as well.
Right.
But, it all comes down to risk and how much risk you're able to handle. If you have a larger farm that is diversified across a bunch of different crops, when you have a downturn in a crop price or an increase in an input, you can pivot a lot easier than a smaller farm can. So it's the ability to manage risk that is really hard for those smaller farmers. But I will say there's a lot of smaller farmers that I've seen that are doing more value-added products. They're doing.
What does that mean?
So that would be if you, I keep going back to strawberries. I'm trying to think of something that's not a strawberry. If you have a blueberry and you're making blueberry jam, that's a value-added product. Okay. Or you're working.
So they're not selling just the raw product off of the plant or the vine. They're taking something and then making the next step with it.
Yeah. And it to you go, wow, that's really cool. I would have paid this much for the blueberries, but now I'm going to pay for this product. And sometimes they can do it with some of their off product too, which makes it makes them able to make money off crop that they might not have made otherwise. They're also, roadside stands have become they're big in North Carolina, especially as you go out to the western part of the state. You start to see them a lot in like the apple areas. But just they're thinking differently as opposed to just saying, we have this crop, we're going to sell it for this many dollars a pound and hope that it works. They're really thinking differently about how to market their product too.
As far as some of these smaller farms, obviously farming is something that people don't just go and say, oh, I'm going to go be a farmer. Like that's something that you really have to kind of be born into in order to get into that industry. So if somebody were to say, like if Josh were to say tomorrow, I'm going to go buy 500 acres and a tractor, what?
Good for Josh.
The expense associated with that is so astronomical. Like is there any sort of like program funding, tax incentive, anything that is being put in place to help people enter into the industry and to help float some of these smaller operations?
Yeah, there are some beginning farmer and rancher programs through USDA. I'm not super familiar with them because I just have, like you just said, I've never had someone come to me and say, I'm ready to start my farm. Yeah. I have the land, I have the money to buy the land, and I'm ready to start it. But USDA does have programs that are geared directly toward beginning farmer and ranchers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about kind of just over the last 6 years since COVID, how the expense of maintaining equipment and acquiring fertilizer and feed and all of those things, but especially equipment, has just gone through the roof. How does that affect the production of what we're doing in the state when we have, it costs $3 million to buy a combine? Yep. I don't know if it actually costs that much, but a couple $1 million to buy these large pieces of equipment.
Or you're buying it used. and just praying that it works. But I mean, that comes down to, again, it's cost benefit. Are you able, first of all, are you even buying that new tractor if you can't afford it? That's something. Are you using older equipment just because that's what you can afford? And some of that older equipment's really good. I've ridden in some of it, and it's like, why would you buy something new? No offense to John Deere. But that's where the growers have to make the decision of, is it pertinent right now for me to buy this tractor? Is it going to make me enough money marginally for it to make sense? And if not, I'm going to make a trade-off somewhere.
Right.
And that's what it all comes down to. One thing I always say too is, when I'm explaining this to like my friends or my parents or whatever, I'm like, farms are businesses, and they're making business decisions every time that they have to make a decision on the farm. And so it's not so different than like a car manufacturing company having to say like, well, we can't afford to do this upgrade or whatever.
Right.
So I just look to farmers as people they're really smart with their money. They're really smart at what they do, and they're going to find the efficiencies where they can find them, and they're going to do the trade-off where they need to, but they love that land, and they're going to do, highest and best use of that land. And if we have these programs to keep them in farming, those are the people we want there, because they're going to be the ones that are keeping, the whole agrarian lifestyle alive and keeping us alive by providing food. And so, I don't want them to have to make those trade-offs, but that's where we are. And I think that as much as we can help them to stay in business, that's where the policy is. That's where all of this is headed.
I agree with what you said earlier about like really trying to find a balance, because we were talking before we started recording about, I obviously I've been very vocal and like at the forefront of kind of the argument for several big growth projects that have gone on around the county. And I like growth. I think it's good for the town for us to invest in ourselves and to have, more entertainment for people that are here. The more housing that we have, theoretically in a vacuum, the more supply you have, then the more affordable it becomes. And so I think sometimes it gets convoluted where it's like, you have to pick one or the other. You have to either be pro-growth or you have to either say, nope, we don't want anything. And I don't think that's reasonable.
No.
Like even I have people all the time, like North Carolina's full, like don't tell them to go somewhere else. Like, oh, this is actually a picture of, Mississippi or Arkansas or whatever.
We were told that.
Yeah. North Carolina is full. Don't come here. Like, no, I don't think that's fair or the right answer, because I'm glad that you chose North Carolina. Like, I'm proud of the state. I want to share it and all of the beautiful things that it has to offer with people that also appreciate those things. And so I think it is a challenge to try to like find that balance of, okay, where and in what capacity can we really just make the sacrifice? And that's really what it is sacrifice some of this acreage in order to support the growth while also trying to preserve the integrity of the community. And the reason why it is growing. And it's a really kind of like hard line to teeter. But I don't think that it's fair to necessarily say you have to pick one or the other.
I don't think you can. I think you're right. And I was actually listening to a podcast from Tennessee where that was happening. They had a mayor that was extremely pro-growth. He passed away. And then they had a city councilman come in and act as mayor who was extremely anti-growth. And it just got gridlocked because, you had people on both sides of the issue, but they were having the conversation that we're having where it's, well, yeah, it's good to have more tax money coming in. It's good to have these facilities and infrastructure and all that brings talent to the area that we need to run these operations. And you still have to have the land to produce the food. So I think if we had the answer to that, we wouldn't be sitting here. We'd be sitting somewhere much more expensive. But yeah, I think you're spot on about it having to be a balance, and the communities all having to talk to each other as well.
See, and I'm so intrigued by the low density housing being the number one threat. after profitability, obviously, because, when you think about people that traditionally would support agriculture, you want low density housing. That is what you desire. You want a half acre, an acre, a 2 acre lot.
You would move out somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, but when that becomes the very thing that poses the risk to the lifestyle that you want, it's like, oh, well, now what do I do? And so I find it so interesting, and like almost a difficult place to be in, because it's almost like, I love this so much that I'm like, do I make this decision to not participate in it because I love it? Like, oh, if you love something, let it go type thing. I don't mean to get that deep into it, but like it really is that really will be what it becomes. And so I find the whole thing so very interesting.
Well, and it hadn't hit me until we started kind of talking about this, but I talked to a hog farmer. This has been 4 weeks ago, but down in Sampson County. And he was talking about, people coming in from, especially up north, they'd buy like 20 acres of land because they can afford it. And they'd put a house in the middle of it and then just keep the lawn mowed all around it. And his point was, they have every right to do that.
Right.
But if everybody does that, at what point does it become nobody can buy a house anymore? And that's where I struggle personally with. I support.
It's so difficult.
I do. I wish that, I'm glad you feel the same way, because I came in going, I hope she's not looking at me for an answer, because I don't have it.
No, not at all. I do. I think like it is a very difficult position, because I want people, like I want that. I personally want 30 acre where we're trying to find somewhere that all four of me, both my siblings and my parents, can go build a house.
Yeah.
And like I want that. And I understand like other people's desire for it, and this like idealized version of like this like tiny homestead and this, that, and the other. I get why it's so attractive. But if everybody goes and does that, especially when you're talking about, taking up 30 acres here and 40 acres there, and 50 acres for this development, and like that eats up a lot of our resources really quickly.
Yep. And then you think about too, low density housing being one thing, and then you bring in high density housing to these areas. Do the roads and all of the other infrastructure, can they support those people? So there's there's so many, it's so complicated. And that's where I go, thank goodness for engineers that figure those things out. But yeah, it's just not an easy answer.
Well, we talked about, obviously increased yield. We talked about conservation easements. We talked about runaway sprawl. Is there anything else specific that you can think of that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I would just, it's kind of become, it's a trope out in the world of just like support your local farmer, but staying involved in what's going on in our ag industry in North Carolina, being that it is the largest industry in the state, is just really important. So if you see anything that's going on in the General Assembly having to do with farmland preservation or having to do with right to farm laws, it's just important to stay involved in those. If you care about where your food comes from, if you care about keeping rural areas rural, you just need to make sure that we have the protections in place for those farmers to be able to operate the way that they need to operate. And it's everyone's business, especially in North Carolina, even if you're like in the middle of RTP and don't ever have a chance to get out of your high rise,
I will ask you this. The conservation easement thing, that is a relatively new concept, I think, for the state of North Carolina, as far as the priority of it. I think.
Yeah. Okay. The priority. Yes.
The conservation easements obviously have been around a long time, but like, I think they've been a lot more popular out west. Like the first time I ever heard of a conservation easement was watching Yellowstone.
Oh, really?
Yes. I had never heard of that before that exact moment where they're talking about, digging a moat around the ranch in conservation easement land. And so what is kind of like the situation with putting pressure on General Assembly to allocate funds for that is competitive enough that it's advantageous for somebody to choose that over selling to a developer?
Well, I think one thing that we saw, and I think you're onto something there, I hadn't really thought about it being something that has a spotlight on it because I've always just been involved in this world. But after COVID, people saw what it looks like to not have food on the shelves. And from that, I think, MAHA was kind of happening, but then all of a sudden, everybody had a spotlight on the food supply chain, where the food was coming from, how it was being grown. And I think this is a natural kind of progression of that, of people going, hold on, what's going on with our food supply in that? Do we have the land to support it? Oh my gosh, all these people are moving in here. What's happening to my rural lands? And so I think the spotlight is there. I do think the Commissioner Troxler, has just done an awesome job of making sure that the General Assembly knows this is a priority and has to be a priority. I wish I had the date. I think it's 2005 is when the Farmland Preservation Program went into effect at the General Assembly. So 2006 would have been the first year that they started doing this in North Carolina, in what it is now. So it's been around for a long time, but people are just starting to pay attention to it now. And it helps it to be a priority when people pay attention to it. And the general public, it's not just the ag industry saying, whoa, we need help. It's the general public saying, hold on a minute, we care about our local farms. We care about the food that comes from North Carolina. What can we do to help?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what can the general public, residents of North Carolina, do to support the Ag Partnership?
So, a lot. So we have events throughout the year that I would encourage anybody who's interested in kind of the civic engagement to attend. And I have a dispatch that I do every Saturday. You can go on the ncagpartnership.com website, sign up for the dispatch. And if you're signed up for that list, you get all of the event invitations. We're having one actually April 16th in Warsaw at the Country Square, where we're going to have, it's just celebrating ag leadership. So we have a bunch of different lawmakers coming. It's really kind of a networking type of event, and you can just come talk about the issues with the people who actually understand agriculture and can make a difference. So coming to those events, just signing up and keeping in touch with what we're doing is the best way to do it, because we have a lot of call to action within those newsletters.
Okay, awesome. Yep. Well, thank you very much for sitting down and talking to me. I think it's just a very interesting topic. It's obviously something that is very near and dear to a lot of North Carolinians, especially when people get real finicky when you start talking, like threatening their way of life, as understandably so. And so I hope obviously that this was helpful to anybody listening. If you have further questions or want to support the Ag Partnership, it's North Carolina agpartnership.org. .com. Yep. Okay. .com. I'm pretty sure there's a donate button up there too. If you want to contribute anything. If you have any further questions for me or Tori, we'll put our email addresses in the description box down below, and make sure you comment, like, and subscribe so that you can be notified for the next episode next month. Guest TBD.